Tear gas just hit us. People are suffering because of this. And everybody else that supported them.
See, as you can see, the more you around, the more you're going to find out. And also, if you stay down here and you never around, you'll never find out.
People outside of Los Angeles know there are not riots happening. There are peaceful protests in Los Angeles being fired upon. Now, peaceful does not mean sedate, but it does mean nonviolent. We're not rioting and are being fired upon.
The protests, and even those who were out of step with what we are advocating, peaceful protest, did not create any violence. Nobody was killed. Get it in your head. And so when martial law is called, what are you going to say? I missed the point. Don't miss the point, you all. Don't think that somehow, because they called out the National Guard, there was violence. There was no violence.
At least they used to say fiery, but mostly peaceful. I guess we're just said fiery and peaceful.
The Pentagon has deployed 700 U.S. Marines to the protests of ICE raids in Los Angeles. They will be joining the 4,000 National Guardsmen already on the ground. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said it's in response to the escalating attacks on law enforcement agents and property damage. But are people getting a much different view of what's going on in LA depending on where they're watching this play out? Because it's quite different when you're talking to people in LA.
Yeah.
And very different than what you're seeing on the news.
Did you speak to people? Have you spoken to people in LA?
My whole family's in LA.
What did they say?
They're saying, people are mad. It's been peaceful for days, and then suddenly these guys showed up and flipped everybody out.
Yeah, I heard.
So that's what my family is saying.
I heard the same thing. I spoke to about 5 people that live in LA, that work in LA, and they said that these protests were very, very orderly. They weren't violent, and they occurred in about a 4-block radius. And we all know how large LA is. And so, in my view, there is no crisis in Los Angeles that ICE did not cause. That is the fact of the matter, right?
You're just a lie. You just lie.
Looks like that. And we now know that Stephen Miller ordered his order that they arrest 3,000 people a day, that ICE arrests 3,000 people a day, led to this. And what I will also say is, California is the largest economy in the United States, has the largest economy. And it has it's the largest state, and it has a GDP that's larger than many countries. And so I think we have to look at what's happening from a bird's eye perspective and look at the why. Trump is militarizing that state as a test run to make sure that he can do it in places like New York, that he can do it in other sanctuary cities. And so there is a plan to this, in my view. And I really think that there's no question that the LAPD, that has 9,000 police officers, could have handled this quite well. But instead of sending in 7,000, 4,007.
Stop it. Get some help.
Last night, throughout downtown LA, thousands of protesters were once again roaming the streets, trying to damage federal buildings. They were stopped from doing so by the National Guard, who ranged themselves in front of a cluster of federal buildings here. And then the LAPD, along with the LA Sheriff's Department, California Highway Patrol, ran a pretty efficient operation, separating those groups from each other, getting them into smaller and smaller groups, effectuating arrests and using tear gas, using flashbang grenades, and in some cases rubber bullets to maintain control. Meantime, U.S. Marines are on the way here. They left their base at 29 Palms yesterday. That's in the Palm Springs area east of Los Angeles. We understood that they staged overnight at Naval Station Seal Beach, but they should be on the streets of L.A. later today. That prompted this ex-post from Governor Gavin Newsom, who said, quote, "The Secretary Ministry of Defense is illegally deploying them onto American streets so Trump can have a talking point at his parade this weekend. It's a blatant abuse of power. We will sue to stop this. But given what we saw on Sunday, the very intense clashes, and the slightly less so on Monday, there is an argument that President Trump can make that the deployment of federal resources is working.
I hope the president would read Article 10 of the Constitution, and I urge all of you to do that as well, because Section 12046 of Article 10 says that the National Guard cannot be called up by the president without the consent of the governor. So that is the basis under which he's proceeding. That is the basis on which the president, the governor of California is suing.
There's a lawsuit now.
Yes.
From Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, against the Trump administration for the deployment of this National Guard. You ran on the set a few minutes ago with it in your hand saying, I've read it.
Yes.
What does it say?
So the lawsuit just dropped. So let me lay this out. The law that the Trump administration is using to deploy the National Guard says this. It says the president has the power to deploy the National Guard to a state in any of three circumstances. First of all, if there's an invasion or a danger of invasion. That's not in play here. Second of all, if there's a rebellion or danger of rebellion, Trump did cite that in his order. And then third, a sort of catch-all, if the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. Trump cited that as well. The catch, and this is what California in their lawsuit really seizes on, there's language at the end that says orders for these purposes, deploying the National Guard, shall be issued through the governors of the state. So the main argument California makes in this lawsuit is, well, this was not issued through the governor, through Gavin Newsom. This was Donald Trump directly to the National Guard. Now, I can tell you what the response is going to be. We haven't seen it yet, but the Trump administration is going to say that's just a technicality. It's really the president's call, and there's no way this law intends to say that the governor can essentially override or cancel the president's order. And I'll tell you what the answer is. The answer is we don't know. Because this particular statute has only ever been invoked one prior time in American history. There have been other incidents of the Insurrection Act. That's not what we're talking about here. This specific lawsuit was only invoked once. It was in 1970, and it involved a postal workers' strike where Richard Nixon deputized the National Guard to deliver the mail. So a very different scenario. That one didn't even go to the court. So we are really in unknown territory here.
In the meantime, the search for those engaged in violent acts on the streets of LA goes on. This man has been a particular target. He was seen on video throwing rocks at law enforcement officers. Well, the Attorney General Pam Bondi announced on Hannity last night that they know who he is. Listen here to the Attorney General.
That guy has just been identified, and they are doing a search warrant on his house as we speak. So you can run, you can't hide. We are coming after you federally. If you assault a police officer, if you rob a store, if you loot, if you spit on a police officer, we're coming after you.
This guy's in his 40s and he's still throwing rocks when he gets upset. He doesn't need a lawyer. He needs a therapist and a really good chiropractor.
It should be calm right now. It's at 5 a.m. But I really worried that they're organizing tonight to take on the 700 Marines, the 2,000 National Guard.
4,000 now.
Right, who decides to show up for the LAPD, because what they're doing now is defiling federal property, but they're also shutting down traffic and commerce in this area. At one point, the local officials have to take a stand. They just sit there in their bunker, put on a windbreaker and do a press conference, and they let President Trump basically is forced to take control of this unrest.
Lawrence, this guy that's on the side of the road pelting cop cars with cement, with cinder blocks, they should make him pay for it.
That's exactly
Anyone
right.
who does this vandalism and looting.
He's got no money.
Because he's throwing the money, he's throwing the blocks.
Take it out of his paycheck.
Windshield.
He should have to pay for those cars to get fixed, not the taxpayers.
All these people claim, a lot of them, that they came to this country for a better life. Meanwhile, they're assaulting our cops, putting their old country's flag up, and causing total mayhem in a once great city. But the leaders aren't doing anything. This is what they're saying.
These are not the people that we were told were going to be detained. And it makes me feel like our city is actually a test case for what happens when the federal government moves in and takes the authority away from the state or away from local government. I don't think that our city should be used for an experiment to see what happens in the nation's second largest city. Well, maybe we can do this to other cities.
Excuse me, that's not true, what she's saying. The federal officials were, because you guys didn't want to help them. They asked for the assistance of the local cops there. The politicians said no. They said, we just want to get the criminal aliens who we have final deportation orders for some, and some of them have criminal offenses. We want to go get them. When they came to the city to do their job, your protesters decided that they were going to obstruct. Now they're trying to get into the prison as well. So don't give me this that they're trying to take over L.A. You guys can have L.A. But as it relates to the criminals in there that don't belong in this country, oh, yes, they are going to enforce federal law.
I just don't understand why they don't want help. Why wouldn't they want the National Guard there? Why wouldn't they want 700 U.S. Marines? Those police officers, last night when I was watching our coverage of it, I was like, this crowd is huge. Yeah. There aren't as many police officers as there are individuals that are rioting, and I was worried for their safety. Why wouldn't they want the help?
Look at this.
Right. You know why? Because they say that by putting the National Guard in there, they're making things worse. They also say they also have 35 minutes before the LAPD responded to ICE's request for reinforcements. That's why President Trump is not taking any more risks. And that's why he went to school in Seattle and Portland and Minneapolis and Kenosha. He saw that maybe he could have been acting a little quicker and was talked out of it in his first term. Then he watched these cities burn, and Joe Biden basically say no problem about that. They basically had what's coming to them, and that was not okay. So when Trump takes over, he's going to make sure that this will not happen. And he's going to make sure that the city will not be out of control. But I think symbolically, and by the way, here's the sheriff of Los Angeles, who when he was in charge, he was actually against this kind of disorder and this looting. Listen to Sheriff Villanueva, who used to have this job in L.A. County.
The worst that we saw on Sunday was absolutely downplayed by the local media, by the politicians. They're all saying, oh, it's largely peaceful. No, it was largely violent. And the concentration of violent activists embedded within people that were just looked like they were trying to peacefully protest was a joke. Because that was you look at the destruction of the CHP cruisers, the shutdown of the 101 freeway. And if you look at the tagging and the broken windows throughout the downtown corridor, it's alarming. Local law enforcement, particularly the sheriff who was responsible for coordinating mutual aid among all these agencies, they were paralyzed in fear about coming to the aid of ICE agents who were under attack. And that right there is the genesis of this entire mess.
Not peaceful at all. They were throwing frozen water bottles at police last night, Molotov cocktails, baseball bats were hidden in the bushes in case they needed them. They were lobbing fireworks at the police and sticks at the police.
Yeah, Seth Bolden says this is what the president wants. It's not what the president wants. He has no interest in doing this.
We don't want this. I don't want my country to become little Mexico. It's great for vacationing, but I don't want the criminals roaming the street, looting Apple. How's looting an Apple store about immigration?
Hey, man, it's not looting, okay? It's undocumented shopping. Some people are really happy that President Trump is sending the National Guard and the Marines in to take care of things in LA, while others think that we should just sit back and do nothing because they don't see any harm in letting liberals destroy the places where they live. I'd love to know which side of the coin you are on. Let me know in the comments section below. You can use my Buy Me a Coffee link to buy Leroy a dog treat. Leroy, stop that. You're so cute. Oh, I love you. I love you. You guys steal the show. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Red Dawn Daily with your host, me, Dawn Marie, and sometimes Leroy. Leroy, you're not bored, are you? Leroy, did you know that 9 out of 10 people only watch to see you? Yeah. I'm just kind of here holding space for you. It's true. It's true. Leroy, you're so much fun. You're way more fun than any puppet. Right, Leroy?
Leftists